Good afternoon. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to be discussing schema learning theory, the history and key persons in the development of this theory, and discussing the importance of it in instructional design. We're going to begin with a song that actually elementary school teachers use to discuss schema.
Schema, 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 what I know, watch it grow. I can make connections, meaningful connections, text to text, text to text. Schema, 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 what I know, watch it grow. I can make connections, meaningful connections, text to world, text to world.
The components of schema are actually quite complex as depicted in this diagram. The key tenets of schema include a combination of old experiences, new experiences, connections to those experiences, deciding the level of importance of those experiences or parts of experiences, and when new information cannot be connected to previous schema, one can become frustrated or confused, which you may have felt seeing that initial picture. I'm going to break apart some of the components and discuss them individually. First, part of schema is that one's knowledge is organized into slots or units, which helps with recall. Because of this, schema guides our choices, behaviors, assists in recalling information, and actually can help us predict the future based on past experiences. We're going to do a little experiment on schema. It's actually an experiment from 1972, Bransford and Johnson, and they had this paragraph and they read it to their subjects. And their subjects were told that they were going to have to recall as much information as possible from this paragraph. So I'm going to read a couple sentences. The procedure is actually quite simple. First, you arrange things into different groups. Of course, one pile may be sufficient depending on how much there is to do. If you have to go somewhere else due to lack of facilities, that is the next step. Otherwise, you're pretty well set. And if you go through and read all this, it doesn't make a lot of sense. However, if I had given you that it's about laundry prior to reading the paragraph, you may have had an easier chance. Of course, in their study, those that were told it was about laundry were able to recall more information than those that were just given to as a cold read. There are two processes believed to help develop schema. The first one is assimilation. Assimilation describes the progression of blending new information into one's already existing schema. So one that thinks a four-legged animal is a dog may think that all of these four-legged animals are dogs because it fits into their schema. Accommodation is the second process. It designates adapting or altering our existing schema after being introduced to new information or experiences. During accommodation, new schemas may be developed. So once that the child was told it was a cat, he has a new schema that is a cat. We're going to watch a quick video on assimilation and discuss.
Butterfly. No, that's a flower.
Bambi didn't have a word for flower,
Pretty.
and now Bambi associates flower with pretty.
Party.
And because she believes the skunk is pretty, she's also labeling the skunk flower. Moving into the history of schema, Immanuel Kant has ties to the earliest theories and specifically schema. He wrote a chapter in his book called Critique of Pure Reason, which was published in 1781 on schema. He defined schema as a process that manifests over time and exposure to its categories. After time, one schema will be able to link certain existences. He wrote that schema could be molded by understandings and could also mold understandings. Psychologist Jean Piaget is accredited with introducing the term to psychology in 1923. He believed intelligence was not merely inherited and that children think differently than adults. Understanding of the world was shaped by one's experiences. In Piaget's theory, the idea that as new experiences happen, new schemas can be developed or old schemas are changed or modified. Piaget is the one who introduced us to the processes of assimilation and accommodation that we mentioned earlier. British psychologist Frederick Bartlett in 1932 wrote a book and introduced the term to educational practices and related it to memory and perception. His study had people read a folk tale and recall the information from that story. He asked them at different and longer periods of time to recount the story. He discovered that the longer the time between the reading and the recall, the less accurate the study participant became. Moreover, the participant inserted their own opinions, stereotypes, or objects of thought from their own experiences. We need to talk about meaningful reception learning when we're talking about schema. This is by David Ausubel. The theories were being published and discussed at almost the same time, and he tried to distance his research from schematic. His theory relies on the notion that knowledge is formed based on what one already knows, which of course is a component of schematic learning theory. He was the first to methodically research and test his theory, and his ideas still influence education today. For example, he placed a large emphasis on making learning meaningful versus rote learning process. He believed that effectiveness of transferring knowledge to one's long-term memory completely corresponded with the link and connections the learner had or made with new knowledge. Furthermore, when information is presented in a logical manner, the brain makes more meaning of the material. And then there's been a lot of various studies since. This is the Office study by Brewers and Trenyon in 1981. They asked people to stay in the office while they waited to take part in an experiment. However, that was the experiment. They were told then, after they left the office, to write down what they remembered. It's interesting because people remembered most typical things that were in there that are office, but then they didn't remember things like a picnic basket or a skull that typically wouldn't be found in an office. Also, it was discovered that people inserted their own opinions of things that should be in an office and had false memories, like pens and books, but that wasn't actually in the original office. This is also by Bransford and Johnson, who did the laundry experiment that we discussed earlier. Their experiment gave some people just this paragraph, and if you have time, you can go ahead and read it, which it doesn't make as much sense as the participants who were given the picture to go along with the paragraph, which, as you can see, they were able to recall more once they had the picture. We're going to discuss how schema plays a role in instructional design. Most models, if not all, have some emphasis on schema. For instance, the Addy model has it here in the analysis section, and it is again before developing any instruction. The Dick and Carey model from 1978 also requests instructional designers to analyze the learners in context prior to developing any instruction. And here, lastly, the Gerlach and Eli model from 1971 wants educators to assess entering behaviors, once again, before planning the lesson. Schema has an important role when designing instruction and must be considered at the beginning of the design and throughout instruction. Thank you for your time.
Schema, schema, schema.